Welcome everyone to the ARG UK AGM. As in the programme that I sent round to everybody, we're going to have about 15 minutes of ARGy business, which includes me showing you what we've been doing during the year. And then it'll be over to our 4 speakers who are going to be much more interesting and tell us lots and lots of things about projects they've been running in the last year. So I just wanted to quick whistle stop before we get onto the presentation. So just to say, we're continuing to support Record Pool. This is a fantastic resource for opportunistic recording, and also some ARGs are actually using it as their main recording portal. So it's fulfilling 2 roles. We're nearly up to 50,000 records. Hopefully we'll get a good spring and it'll push it over the edge. And fantastic, we've got over 12,000 recorders now, which is just shows how widespread it is and how well it's being used. So very pleased to continue to support Record Pool. And the other recording system that ARG UK is supporting is ARG Web. This is Steve Langham's brainchild, really. He's run it as Surrey ARG for 17 years, and now it's being expanded to the rest of the country. Apart from there seems to be a blank in Lincolnshire, Rutland and South Wales, but I think it's there, it just hasn't been switched on. So it manages ARG membership, so it's quite handy, particularly if people are paying, because it covers PayPal. Multi-tier security access, which means that you can see what you've got a license to see. So if you haven't got a smooth snake license, you can't see smooth snakes. We can set up reptile transects, toad crossing, which was a new app he launched last year, and pond surveys. It's a means that surveyors can use to look for sites that need to be surveyed. It gives them all the information they need. You can download a map, you can download a survey form, it tells you where to park the car, tells you if there's any black spots, so it's quite handy for that. Online recording, so it's a cloud-based portal. And we've got these land manager stakeholder portals, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute, but it's quite handy that land managers can then log into their site and see what's been seen in real time, and that's something a lot of land managers are quite keen on. And the automated meteorological and astronomical metadata, so basically it taps into the local weather station and automatically adds in that data. So means that surveyors don't need to be sort of measuring and putting their finger in the air to see what the wind speed is. So those are the 2 systems that ARG UK is supporting this year. So special projects, we're going to talk a little bit more about projects that we've been involved with later, but the main projects that ARG UK itself is involved with is a pond in every prison, which is the ambition to create or restore a wildlife pond in all 119 prisons in England and Wales. And I should say we've even succeeded in getting 2 into Brixton now, so I'm quite pleased about that. It's definitely got a big momentum behind it, and senior management and the Ministry of Justice have been very keen to see it be a success. I've shown this picture because this is an information board that we put together. You can see that I've had a close hand in this because it features all 3 of our native newts, as well as the life cycle of the common frog. And then I've managed to push the inverts in the plants into the corner a bit. I don't know if I should apologise for that. But that board is now going to be available to all 119 prisons, and they can use it to provide information about their new pond. We've also run training events across England and Wales. Now, obviously with COVID, there's been a lot of restrictions, but myself, Dave Willis of HIWARG, and David Orchard of Argyll in Lancashire have run a total of 8 pond days. And each pond day has had between 3 and 6 prisons attending. So we've sort of hit a good, 40, 45 prisons that way. And we're also supporting habitat management effort at the prisons. And there'll be a slide at the end, again, of the Lancashire ARG out enthusiastically cutting back trees for red-crested newt ponds. So just to say, we've got a new project, which has just started in the beginning of February. This is an HMPPS innovation grant. The idea is to reconnect offenders in the criminal justice system with the natural world. Now, as I've said, prisons have ponds, we've created ponds. So the idea of the project is to get the prisoners out looking at the ponds, doing pond dipping, finding out what's in there, and just giving them an opportunity to get out of their cells and sort of feel the wind on their face and understand a bit more about the world about them. Concurrent with that, we're going to continue to work on the MOJ sites, providing training to staff and offenders, and we're going to create more outreach and interpretive materials. So the idea is to try and reach a sector of society that's often overlooked and give them an opportunity to find out more about what's going on. And I'm going to say this, actually, I gave a presentation at Thorn Cross, and one of the prisoners knew more about newts than I did, but he turned out to be a gamekeeper. So I think you have to be a little bit careful about making assumptions. So this is another big project that we're just kicking off this year. We talked about it at the Scottish regional meeting, or country meeting, I should say. So we're going to repeat a survey that was originally commissioned by Scottish Natural Heritage in 1992 and 1993 and published in 1994. And that was coordinated by Chris Redding. And that's the reference if anybody wants to catch up on it. So what we're doing is revisiting the 17 original sites, and Caledonian Conservation, Chris Catherine kindly plotted them for us. So these are the 17 sites around Scotland, and we are encouraging surveyors to come forward. We've got a team coming up from Cumbria, and also hopefully a smaller team coming up from Nerag to cross the border there. But really, anybody that's in Scotland is welcome. We're going to set this up on our web, as I mentioned earlier, which means that anybody that wants to can see the sites, visit the sites, and help us survey for adders and other reptiles. So that's a big project that's literally just starting. We've got our first Zoom training meeting on Monday, and that will run for 2 years. And hopefully it will help to inform Scottish Government reptile strategy. And I'm very much hoping our 2 new trustees, Eric and Jeanette, will be helping with this. I think they've both offered to visit some of the sites, helping us, guiding us, I think, to take this forward and be successful. I should say the project's been commissioned by Nature Scot, and we are in partnership with Amphibian and Reptile Conservation on this. So it's a very much a joint effort. So Dragons in the Hills, I'm not going to say anything about Dragons in the Hills, in fact, because Rob and Ryan are going to talk about it later. I just wanted to highlight that we're in the 3rd year of a 3-year project, and there, in fact, is Rob and Ryan in Silent Valley, taking people on reptile walks and doing good stuff, pin the tail on the lizard. So we're going to hear more about that later. And then finally, I've just put some pictures in of jolly happy volunteers from this spring, looking a little bit cold. So this is the Lancashire volunteers, as I said, clearing vegetation from around ponds at HMP Wymot, which is in Leyland. And the idea is to try and encourage great crested newts to thrive at that location. And then that's our North Merseyside ARG volunteers, and that's another fantastic group. Mike seems to have multiple pairs of hands, and they are undertaking the Herculean task of clearing scrub from the Sefton Coast sand dunes to support sand lizards and natterjacks, I should add. So I'm now going to say over to Emma. Let's get on to the stuff that everybody signed up for. And Emma, if you could share, please.
So thank you very much for inviting me to join you this evening. I'm going to talk about the work we've been doing to try and ensure the needs of amphibians and reptiles are better taken into account in landscape decision making. And this has been a real team effort, bringing together the collective knowledge of volunteers, conservation NGOs, consultants and researchers. And I myself am a research fellow at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. So I'm part of a network of researchers spread right across the country who are all studying how we can make better and fairer decisions around how we use land to benefit both people and the environment. So there are researchers within the network studying a whole range of issues, but what I focus on is how our landscapes can better support biodiversity. So my work is all about trying to understand how different species use landscapes and how the changes we make to those landscapes might affect them. And I actually work on a whole range of different species who will use landscapes in slightly different ways. So, and I am fortunate in getting to spend a lot of my time working closely with species experts at NGOs like ARG UK to try and translate the latest understanding of species behaviour into computer models that simulate how species use landscapes. So for a given landscape, the model tries to predict how many animals are living there and what habitats that particular animal might be using. So the idea is they give land managers who might not know much about the species a species eye view of their landscape. So which part of the landscape are important to different types of animals, and where are those animals most likely to be spending their time. So this is an example of two of the models we built for birds, and we wanted to build similar models for amphibians and for reptiles, because we know there is still a widespread lack of understanding of amphibian and reptile needs among decision makers. And also our national biodiversity indicators don't yet include any data on amphibians or reptiles, although we're working on this. And this can be a problem because these are the trend lines that we use to panic policymakers into action. And it can be quite difficult to get national policy to take actions if you don't have a line on a graph that A, shows the need to take an action, and B, provides those policymakers with a way of measuring that any actions they do take have caused improvements. And finally, we know that habitat connectivity and continuity is really important for these species. And we're finding more and more that net gain calculations done using the current biodiversity metrics can produce poor outcomes that don't meet these species' needs. And I'm going to talk more about that later. So we chose two focal species, one amphibian and one reptile, to try and build models for. And we chose the common toad to represent amphibian needs because it's our most terrestrial amphibian. So it spends more time than any other amphibian out and about in the landscape around the pond. And we chose common lizard to represent reptile needs because it's our smallest and least mobile reptile, and it's actually quite under-researched in the UK. And crucially, both of these species are widespread and of increasing conservation concerns, so they're good focal species to use. So if we take the toads first, how do we go about building a model that predicts where toads are going to be spending their time in a landscape? So just like the toads, we start with the breeding pond location. So this red blob here is the location of my local toads breeding pond. So we know that toads are typically spread out to around 2 kilometres around their pond. And we know that the further you go away from the pond, the fewer toads you're going to encounter because not so many toads bother to walk that far. But we know that toads don't spread out equally in all directions. They prefer some habitats more than others. So we needed some estimates of which types of habitats they prefer. So Angie really helped us out here in helping us to create a questionnaire to collect this information, and also identifying amphibian experts, some of whom are in the audience tonight, to fill in that questionnaire. So we asked them to score 77 habitat types based on their foraging resource provision for toads. And then we could average the scores across all the experts to get an estimate of how good each habitat type is for toads, how likely they are to want to go and spend their time there. And these are just some of the answers that the experts gave. You could see they all agreed that deciduous woodland was a really great toad foraging habitat. And at the other end of the spectrum, they were all pretty much agreed that urban centres that are really dense with lots of concrete and buildings are really not very great foraging habitat for a toad. So we can use this information to take our map of where the habitats are in the landscape and turn it into a map of how good each of those habitats is from a toad point of view. So darker green here is the better quality habitats if you're a toad. And we can feed this into the model so that our virtual toads inside the computer, they forage outwards from their breeding pond, spending more time in the nearby habitats and also more time in the better quality habitats. So dark green here is more toads are predicted to be hanging out here. But those of us who are toad patrollers all know it's not this simple. Toads can't freely access any habitat they want to. We have to account for the effect of roads, which can act as a significant barrier for amphibian movement. But that's okay, we can do that. Researchers have fairly well measured the likelihood of a toad getting safely across a road on its own and how that depends on the amount of traffic on that road. So we can use this information to map the risk that different roads pose to toads and feed that into our model so that where they're foraging is now limited by their ability to safely access those habitats. So that's how we can build a model that predicts where toads might be spending their time. What about the lizards? Well, just as we have our virtual toads foraging around their breeding pond, so we make our virtual lizards forage around their favourite basking site, because we know that lizards have to warm up first before they go off to forage. So we did the same thing again, and we asked 10 reptile experts this time to score the same 77 habitat types according to their foraging resource provision for common lizards specifically, and how good they were at providing basking sites for those common lizards to use. And we take into account the fact that some patches of a given habitat might be naturally shaded by trees or by hills, and so they won't be as good at providing basking sites as another patch of that habitat that's in a more sunny location. So we take all of that into account. And we then use literature data to set the model's parameters for how far the lizards typically roam around their basking site, which actually isn't all that far, and also their sort of survival and reproductive abilities. And that gives us everything we need to know in order to work out how many lizards and where they're expected to be living in different landscapes. So we've now got one model for toads predicting where they will be and one model for lizards. But are the model's predictions correct? So Jenny and Ashley at FrogLife helped us to send out a survey form to all the toad patrols in the country, asking them which habitats their toads appear to migrate from. So some of you here may have filled this in. And we were really blown away because 73 toad patrols sent back completed survey forms, which was absolutely fantastic. And based on their answers, we could rank the habitats from those that were least used to those that were most used by this particular set of toad populations. And we could then run the model to predict where the toads were expected to be foraging around each of these toad crossings. So we've then got a predicted level of use for each habitat type. And we were able to show a strong positive correlation between the model's predictions and the patrollers' observations. So those habitats that the model predicted to be most used by these toad populations were also the ones that patrollers were most often reporting seeing their toads coming from. So that was a really good sign that hopefully the model is getting it right. What about the lizards? Well, Surrey Amphibian and Reptile Group have some really fantastic data sets collected through their ARG web system. So we compared our lizard counts to those. In particular, they've got some long-term reptile monitoring sites where they've got transects set up that they repeatedly survey. And we were able to show that those sites where the surveyors typically record more common lizards were also the sites that were more likely to be predicted by the model to have more lizards living there. So that was a good sign that it was getting the numbers of lizards right. Now, because SARG surveyors record the exact locations of their lizard sightings, we were also able to do a second check and check that whether the model was predicting exactly where the lizards are within the site, not just how many there roughly should be. And we were able to show that on average, the model was predicting significantly more lizards at the exact sighting locations compared to random locations nearby. So that was another good sign that hopefully the lizard model is getting it right. And we've since received some really great data sets from other parts of the country and from other ARG members. And we're now working to use those to check that the model works equally well in other places too. So we've now got two models, one for toads and one for lizards, that we can use with some confidence because we have kind of checked that their predictions match up with what you're all seeing these species doing out there in real life. So what have we been using the models to do since? Because that's the point of a model. Once you've got it, you want to use it to do stuff. So Angie already mentioned the Dragons in the Hills project. As part of their project, they're trying to get more records of where common lizards are in Northern Ireland. And so we used the habitat suitability scores from our common lizard model to map habitat suitability for common lizards across Northern Ireland. And we could then send this over to them in case it was helpful for identifying areas where their surveyors might want to go and look for lizards. So I've also been working with Jenny Hooper over at Froglife, who runs their Discovering Dew Ponds project in the South Downs. And as part of that project, they're restoring a series of dew ponds to try and help amphibians colonise what is actually quite a dry area of the country. And so we've been able to zoom in on some of their dew ponds that they're restoring and use the habitat scores from the toad model to identify ponds where there's lots of good toad foraging habitat around already. So these are ponds that amphibians might be able to colonise really quickly, and other ponds that are more isolated. And Jenny's been chatting to the land managers here in this area, asking them whether maybe as well as restoring the dew pond, they might think about also creating a hedgerow to better link it with nearby foraging habitat and make it more accessible for the amphibians. So that's kind of an example of where we've been using the models to provide information for habitat creation. We've also been using the toad model to try and help demonstrate the impacts of proposed habitat loss. So this area here is the area that the Merrow Street Toad Patrol look after, and this red splodge marks their toad's breeding pond. So they got in touch because they were concerned about this site here and the fact that a lot of these trees are proposed to be removed in order to build some new houses here. So we ran the toad model and it confirmed the patrollers' observations that this site is predicted to be really well used by toads as just a day-to-day foraging habitat for them to live in. Now the developers are proposing to compensate for removing lots of these trees by creating what they're calling a meadow habitat there. What they're actually describing is a wildflower verge next door to this main road. And our expert scores for that different habitats demonstrate that even if this was a proper meadow, which it won't be because it'll be so small, it won't make up for removing this tree cover because meadows are just not as high scoring from a toad's point of view as the woodland that already there is, just doesn't offer them as many resources. And finally, the environmental impact assessment for this site said that the application site is separated from the nearest pond by amenity grassland, so that's it there. And they claim that this reduces how useful it is to amphibians because these two areas are not well connected by suitable foraging habitat. Well, we know from the Toad Patroller survey that many of you filled in that 13% of toad patrols surveyed said their toads crossed amenity grassland to get to their ponds. Perfectly fine with no problem. And actually, this site and this pond are really well connected from an urban toad's point of view because they can get between the two without crossing a road. And as we all know, that crossing roads is the biggest danger for urban toad populations. So, and the really great thing about the toad model and the lizard model is that they allow you to zoom out and take a landscape level perspective. So here's the location of that breeding pond, and this is the square that I was showing you previously, zoomed in landscape. This is how much we zoomed out to 10-kilometre scale. And this is the rest of the town that site belongs to. And you can see that to the north of the town, the model predicts lots of toads are living there and also to the south, but really not many toads are living in the town itself. So if the toads that live here at these and use this breeding pond are lost, if they all die out, which is a real possibility because much of their habitat is being proposed to be removed, if they are gone, then this will clearly be a net loss to this town's biodiversity. And the Merrow Street Toad Patrollers are really having to work quite hard to get this recognised because the biodiversity metrics that developers are currently required to use don't adequately represent the needs of local amphibians. So if you've faced anything similar recently and you have any advice that you can share with the Merrow Street Toad Patrollers, do get in touch with them. Every little bit of shared advice helps us to collectively stand up for amphibians and reptiles. Okay, so to wrap up, the needs of amphibians and reptiles are still often overlooked in landscape decision making, and the models we've built are intended to help people better understand how these species use landscapes and how proposed changes to landscapes might affect them. These models incorporate the combined knowledge of volunteers like yourselves, of NGOs and researchers. Thank you so much for contributing your knowledge, time and data. We literally couldn't have built these models without your help. And these models are here to help support conservation of amphibians and reptiles. So if you think these models or their predictions could be of use to you and your local amphibians, feel free to get in touch anytime, and we will do whatever we can to help and support you. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Emma. I'm going to hand over to Sam, because Sam is our question person.
Oh, John's just jumped in with a question there. We didn't have any questions as such. I've made a few notes. And that was one question I was going to ask, actually, John. Is there a possibility that we could add these models into ARG web at some point so that we can direct our survey efforts?
Yeah, I mean, so I've chatted a bit to Steve about this. Yeah, this would be a great thing to do. One thing you've got to be careful of, particularly when you run the amphibian model, is that it's running off sort of like national mapping data sets, and those generally don't have most ponds included. We've got very, very poor information on where ponds are in this country. And so if we were going to incorporate them into ARG web, we'd also have to make sure there was some way that you could draw on a location of a pond that you knew was there, but is not there in the national mapping data sets, so that it didn't overlook the fact that there would be amphibians living there just because it didn't know the pond was there. So yeah, that would be something we'd love to do in the future.
Great. Linked to that, before I go to one other question there, sorry if I missed it, Emma, but I was interested myself about how you might be accounting for regional variances in the habitat preferences or availability. We did some modelling over in West Wales on adder habitats, and I asked Steve Langham over in Surrey his thoughts on it, and he gave me a whole different set of criteria for what adders would use to what we observed them in. So is there a way in the model that it accounts for that?
Okay, so we tried to get scores for every possible habitat type. That's why there were 77. But yeah, so that's kind of tells the model what they prefer over other things. So if a particular habitat doesn't occur in the landscape, then the model doesn't mind. It just looks at what is there and it says what would the adder prefer to go into instead. So the only difference is that if it thinks that these aren't as attractive as something else, then it might predict the population is slightly smaller in that area than in the other area, which, as you say, might not be true because they're used to just making use of those particular habitats. But that's something that we could, that's kind of something to bear in mind if we compare areas that are a long way apart, but it should be fine if you're just looking within a region where they should behave similarly.
Yeah. So I think David O'Brien has also asked something similar about looking at regional differences for toads being associated with coniferous woodland in different parts of the country as well, and up in Scotland. So I think you've kind of answered that it should be able to cope with it. Becky had asked, how tricky would it be to look at change in habitat suitability over time with the models?
Yeah, okay, so you can they just take a map. So if you want, you can give it a different map each year. As say, if you were restoring habitat, you might do the first map, which is what it is now, and then you might have a future map, which is with your new ponds or your new woodlands or whatever, and then another one in the future where these were getting better and better, and then you can run the model over those over successive time. And the good thing about the model is it knows something about the year before. So the animals that were produced the year before then are still alive the next year, apart from the fraction that have died. So you get the this continuity going through of how it would increase the population. So yeah, it can definitely, that's definitely something that we could try with it if you were interested.
How are we doing for time, Angie? Have we got time for any more?
We should, yeah, I think we should move on. I think Emma's very accessible, so I think if anybody wanted to ask Emma a question, I'd be happy to pass that on.
Yeah, and I'll store all these questions anyway as well.
I'll have a look through the chat and pop any answers to things in there as well.
Yeah, thank you. There's a few in the Q&A.
Okay.
Okay, so next I'm going to introduce Kaylee Parkes, who is a volunteer for OxARG and GlosARG. In fact, she's both. She's been working on a site in the Cotswolds, and she's going to tell us about her surveys and researchers there. Over to you, Kaylee. Can you share?
Hello, everybody. My name's Kaylee. Thank you very much for having me here this evening. I'm a volunteer with ARG UK. I've been surveying a site in the Cotswolds for just under a year, and I just wanted to talk a bit about it today and the results from it. So I will start with the site. It's approximately 5 hectares in size. It is accessible to the public, and it also includes a disused quarry on site, which does not have public access. The site is unimproved grassland. It's a semi-natural habitat that supports a wide range of flora and fauna. There are lots of wildflowers during the summer months and abundance of butterflies. It's typically a good habitat for reptiles. There's a mosaic of habitat with large grassland areas and areas of gorse, scrub and bracken, and varied vegetational height and structure, which provide basking areas for reptiles in close proximity to areas of scrub where reptiles can hide from predators. The topography of the site also provides mounds and many south-facing slopes and sheltered sun trap areas between the scrub. There is conservation grazing by cattle, although they're not present all year round. Cattle can be quite sympathetic grazers. They don't tend to graze everything down to one level. They tend to grab and pull tussocks of grass and leave sort of the tussocks of grass and maintain vegetational height structure. So I will talk a bit about the surveys. They all started because of an unconfirmed sighting of an adder at the location. The landowners were contacted for permission to carry out the surveys, and landowner permission was granted. On the 9th of April last year, a preliminary site visit was carried out with the landowners to assess the habitat and complete a risk assessment. And on that day, we actually found 7 individuals, which was extremely exciting and encouraging. I was not really expecting to see that many, especially on the first day. I started my surveys the same month, and these involved a transect route, scanning the area for adder presence. I split the site into compartments, each with natural borders which are created by the land topography. And this was to identify areas of high abundance and also assist with the management of the site. In May last year, 14 numbered artificial refugia were added to the site. These were placed in locations that were not accessible to the public or hidden away from the public. And that's just to reduce disturbance, prevent any unintentional injury to any reptiles that are underneath the refugia, and also prevent any conflicts. I also wanted to have a look at identifying individuals using their unique head markings to help provide more accurate representation of the population. So on each visit, I made attempts of photographing wherever I could any adders seen, and in particular trying to obtain any headshot images. Now, during my surveys, I had noticed that I kept finding 2 adders in the same location. There was a female adder at the base of a hawthorn tree and a male adder which wasn't too far away at the base of another tree. And these became regular sightings on my surveys. Even on days when other sightings were low, I could always seem to rely on finding these 2 adders. Even on one occasion, on a day when it was overcast and drizzling, the female adder was the only sighting that I saw that day. And so I did give them the nicknames of Faith, aka Old Faithful, and Robin, aka Reliant Robin. So moving on to the results. There were 10 surveys that were completed between April and October last year. There were 30 adders in total, 22 females and 8 males. The highest number seen in one day was 10 individuals. There was also breeding activity on site. Males were observed guarding females. I was also very excited to find a very young adder hidden in the grass on one visit. So the results have been very promising, although more work is required to increase the data set and establish a greater understanding of population abundance. Through the photographic identification, I have been able to identify 4 individuals so far. Each of these were found either in the same location or in close proximity from the previous sighting, and further analysis may be able to establish any degree of site fidelity. There were also other reptiles that were observed and recorded on site. So once the refugia were placed down, we started observing slow worms. There were 30 slow worms that we saw in total, including 6 under one refuger, which was the most we found in one occasion. 19 common lizards were observed, although I believe the number was much greater, as I could hear a lot of scurrying into bushes as I was walking around. 3 grass snakes were observed on site, including one that was sharing a refuger with an adder, and a little common toad, which had made home under one of the refugers. So what this means for the future of the adders. We have been working closely with the landowners and sharing the data which can assist with determining best managing practice for the site. The site is already well managed and sympathetically managed for reptiles, with areas of scrub that are left to provide shelter. Some suggestions of future management would be to maintain areas in a mid-successive state, to provide habitat for reptiles and areas to bask close to areas of safety, to create micro-habitats. For example, at the bottom of the quarry, there's an area that's quite damp underfoot. There is evidence of aquatic vegetation, and this is also the location where the common toad was found. So possibly creating a pond in this area could increase biodiversity and support the grass snake population also. With barriers, areas of scrub where there are high numbers of adders are present could be fenced around just to prevent the public and livestock from trampling on any habitat or refuger. There were a few areas where there were quite high numbers of adders that we weren't able to put refuger down just because they were too open to the public, and so this might be able to solve that problem. Connectivity on a smaller scale as well as a larger scale. On a smaller scale around the site, the areas of scrub, there's quite large areas of grassland in between. By providing kind of corridors of scrubland, it could help prevent the adders having to cross large areas of open grassland where they may be vulnerable to predators, dog walkers, or the public. And on a larger scale, it's the connectivity of the site. It is surrounded by agricultural land and a very busy road, which can result in fragmentation and isolated populations. Working with the public, signs are present at the site advising people to keep dogs on leads. Unfortunately, I did witness a number of occasions where people allowed their dogs to run loose on the site. So it is sort of working with the public, educating the importance of keeping dogs on a lead. But the largest learning point I found from doing this surveys is the importance of reporting sightings, as all of this came about from an unconfirmed adder sighting, and it's resulted in a breeding population of adders and a potential stronghold. And then future projects. So I'm hoping to continue monitoring the site and create a larger data set, also creating a library of identified individuals which can assist with establishing a true representation of the population abundance, distribution, and sex ratio. And this will also assist with conservation priorities. I'd also like to expand the surveys to include road verges and site borders to look at potential connectivity of the site to other areas of suitable habitat. Movements of individuals can help determine how much of the site is utilised, and also look into possible site fidelity. And hopefully continued surveying of the site. I would like to locate the high vernacular in order to prioritise areas of protection on the site. So that is the end of my talk. I'd like to give a thank you to Dr. Angela Julian for getting me in touch with the landowners and supporting me through the surveys. And I would like to thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Kaylee. That's lovely. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to reinforce that this all came about from an unverified sighting on record pool. In fact, there were 2, and we went forth to sort of see what was going on. And out of that ad hoc opportunistic sighting, all this incredible project has resulted. And the landowners have been absolutely brilliant and actually changed their management in order to help the reptiles, which is very good news. Okay, I'm going to pass to Sam quickly for questions.
Okay, we've had a question coming in from Miranda asking whether the farmer is happy that there are many adders where his cattle are grazing.
They are very happy. They have been very good landowners. They're very exciting. Very excited to find that we've got adders on site, and they are working with us in order to manage the land accordingly. as I say, the cattle are not on site all year round, so they weren't on site during any part of my survey period.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I just want to say I absolutely love the adder signage as well. I think it's a really good thing to flag up that it's an adder breeding area and have a really nice positive spin on it. So I just think that might be nice to maybe have a look at for our resources with ARG UK as well, Angie, possibly. I think that's it. Tarek has said something. If you want to pop into the chat, maybe. Is that okay, Kaylee? Because there's a couple of questions in there as well, if you're happy to have a quick look at those too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Kaylee. That's fantastic. Our colleague, Pete West from Hampshire and Isle of Wight Amphibian Reptile Group. This is a very special project that Pete has really nurtured and taken forward. So I think it's quite exciting as well. Okay, over to you, Pete.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, as Angie said, Pete West from Hampshire and Isle of Wight Amphibian Reptile Group. And just talking about leeches on amphibians, and it just came, this all started on just a photo on the Amphibian and Reptile Group discussion forum, and August 2020, Chris sort of posted this photo. Now, there was quite a few comments on it at the time, but nobody seemed to have seen this before, and I discussed it with sort of Steve Elaine, and got in touch with the Freshwater Habitats Trust, because I just thought it's strange that nobody had seen this before, and it was like nobody seemed to be taken up. So I was intrigued. We managed to get some samples sent off to Gardner Wildlife Health to test, and sort of went from there. So I searched in the internet for lots of pictures, found it really hard to find many pictures. I did find a couple, but nothing from sort of this part of the world. So I was a bit intrigued, wanted to find out more. And so it went on, and Steve Elaine sent me this link. He found this picture of a poorly toad on an RSPB forum in 2012. So it's a lot older than it. There's a big gap between 2012 and 2020. But we couldn't find out much about it. So basically, I contacted Mad Penguin, who posted it, and nothing. They hadn't been active for several years on this forum. So I then started going through all their posts that they'd ever posted on this forum, and sort of found out that they lived on the Isle of Wight. So I thought, oh, it's in our area, so I'll take it a bit further. So from there, we started a Facebook campaign on Isle of Wight Nature, and started posting up pictures, asking if people had seen anything like this before. And we were quite surprised. We actually had quite a lot. And in fact, actually, the Isle of Wight Reptilarium, Neil Reed, who runs it, actually got in touch with me, and he said, well, we've been seeing this for about 10 years. He said, no, we just thought it was, everyone was seeing this. And it was like, well, there's very little information about this anywhere. So together, we got together on it. And on the Isle of Wight Reptilarium's website, we've put this leech survey, so done through sort of Google Forms. We sort of posted that all across the island, on mainly on the Isle of Wight Nature Group, but we also shared it amongst other contacts we had over there. And we started getting quite a few reports back of sort of mainly frogs and toads. There were some anecdotal comments about newts, but we didn't get any photos back on that, so we haven't actually included them in this so far, because we've yet to prove it. But I think possibly frogs and toads are more commonly seen walking around the garden rather than newts, so it's probably skewed a bit towards that. But yeah, so we followed this up last year with Suckers for Amphibians. We thought it gives it a bit of a ring, and sort of makes it a bit easier. We used one post and then shared that, because then we could follow through all the links. And Angie and ARG UK actually sort of supported that, and they sort of pushed it on a national level as well on the website and on the forum. So it's it got quite a lot of coverage. So I'm just going to move the video out of the way. I can't. Yes, okay. Yeah, okay. So yeah, so basically we sort of shared it widely, and we actually got again sort of quite a few responses back. So I'm just going to run through some of that. What we're actually seeing is a very large number of small leeches, and we've had sort of, you know, some of these amphibians were carrying sort of sometimes 50, 60, even more leeches, very specific feeding behaviour. So we were finding them particularly on toads, they're on the eyes, but also frogs, we'd sometimes find them on the eyes as well, on the throat and under the armpits, on the axilla, lower abdomen. Frogs tended to get them more on the lower abdomen than toads. So as a hypothesis, we're sort of wondering if it's more sort of the toxins in the skin on toads. We think they were more specific to the armpits, throat and eyes on toads. But as you'll see, we want to get more sightings of this. So what's happened is as we progressed with this, we were trying to get a lot of the cases where possible to get samples sent to Garden Wildlife Health. They've come on board, they've been doing lots of testing, but this is a breakdown of the cases. So obviously the red one, this was the first one. This is Chris's photo, and then we had our 2020 Facebook Isle of Wight survey. So we had 9 cases from 2020 and then a handful of cases before that. Then when we did the 2021 survey, we actually had some more earlier cases come back up as well. So we had one in 2001, and since then in sort of December time, I think it was, we had someone remembered a case from 2002. So there have been earlier cases. What was interesting out of the 2021 cases is we focused most of our sort of online surveys in July to sort of September time, because that's when most of these cases seem to be flagged up. So we thought it's possibly linked to maybe a breeding season, maybe when the young are out, because we thought they might have been young leeches, and that's why they had such heavy loads on. However, in 2021, we've been getting cases right through to November, and we've actually had, you notice at the bottom, we've even had one in very early February. So it's like, so we're starting to think, actually, this is probably an all year thing. And as we go through, I'm skipping a lot at the moment because it's most of the talk's going to be at the end when I go through what we found out so far. But out of the species that were parasitized, it's sort of more frogs than toads, but you know, not much different. So I think it's more that we're basing this just on what we're seeing, because a lot of the reports we've had so far have all been from garden ponds. So we don't have any wild sightings yet. So we're obviously missing a lot. So this is where we're going to come to you in a minute. We're going to say we need you to be looking for more sightings. We need a lot more information on this because we're still very heavily in the dark. But anyway, getting back onto the samples, since we started this, 5 samples have been sent to Garden Wildlife Health. In 2021, Bug Life came on board as well, and they've been sampling morphologically to try and identify the species. So out of those 5 samples, we've got this distribution. So we had outside of the Isle of Wight, we've had sort of 3 cases. We've had 2 in sort of the Exeter area, 1 in Bristol. The sample failed on that one, so we haven't actually included that as a sample. They weren't in very good condition when they got to Garden Wildlife Health. But the blue dots are basically ones that we haven't been able to sample properly. And then you'll notice that there's 5 dots there, 1 orange, 4 red. And the orange one is a potentially native species. And the red one's very high probability of a non-native species. And so that's that made us sort of think a bit more and sort of wanted to dig deeper. So there's currently no definite ID, although there are some suspects. So we can't go into that at the moment because we don't have a clear enough picture. We know that there are some native species involved, and we'll come on to that in a minute. There's also there's a high probability that there's a non-native species involved in this. 4 out of the 5 samples were potentially non-native. So we need more research, more samples, and we basically want to just try and find out what the distribution is and what the potential impact is, because it's we don't think the actual parasitization will be huge, because it's there's several species that actually feed on amphibians, but if we're looking at a non-native species, we're not quite sure where it's come from. We're not quite sure if there's a disease or any other implication with that. So it's so basically it's quite interesting sort of finding out this information, but we just want to know a little bit more about it. So we've got the odd one out. So what we've got here, 3 pictures. You might notice one on the left is what I started off my slide. That's possibly a native species. That was one of the tested animals. Possibly an Herpetological. It wasn't a conclusive ID on that one. The one in the middle is the one from February, which we think might be just by photo ID, possibly Hemiclepsis or Placardella. We haven't managed to get any samples of this one just yet. I am in discussion with the finder. They did remove some of the leeches, but we haven't got a sample to send back. So they removed the leeches and released the frog. So we're hoping that we're going to get some from there. And then the last one was one from Bride, which was potentially an introduced species. So we've got 3 pictures there, sort of quite a wide variety of potential leeches involved. So it's we need to get, again, coming back to it, we do need far more samples off to Garden Wildlife Health, so we can actually learn more about this. I forgot I named them underneath. So these are the 4 samples. These all come up on DNA and in morphological sampling, potentially all part of the same family of leeches. We're not sure if it is the same species. Needs a lot more testing to be done yet. And it just shows that there is even on these leeches, there's a certain amount of variability. And we think it's possibly the coloration, because it's they do match a lot of the other features, which I'll come on to in a minute. But it's from sort of quite dark to sort of a pale colour. There's a certain amount of variability, but it's there are some features we're going to move on to that will be useful for identifying them in the field. So what to look for is the very large caudal sucker, and this is the one sort of feature that is probably going to help you the most. So we'll come on to a bit more details. These are very, very small leeches. So we're looking at maximum sort of 2 centimetres. But some of the ones that have been removed were sort of not much more than 2 millimetres. So we're talking quite small. They've got 2 eyes and very indistinct patterning. So when we come to the ID features here, the things we need to remember, they're very small, very large caudal sucker, 2 eye spots. Now, some of the other species, like Placardella costata, has got 2 eye spots, but the back of a Placardella costata is got sort of quite distinct dorsal papillae. So that's like small lumps and bumps on their back. Also, Herpetological Stagnalis has got 2 eyes, but they've also got just behind the eyes, there's quite a hard dorsal scute, a bit like a scale. So we can actually differentiate between those 3 species. But also the intersync patterning. And if you want to go into that much depth, you can actually look underneath and try and identify them from the sconophores. I probably won't do that because I'm not sure my glasses are going to be strong enough, but if you look for small leeches with a very large caudal sucker, possibly more than half of their body width in a relaxed position, that's a good indicator. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to sort of start some sort of hate campaign against leeches. So we've got to be careful that we're not going all out on sort of leech hatred. So it's all about sort of finding more about the species. You know, is there an impact, and just go from there. So what you can do, this is the important page. After all that, you could probably just looked at this and not actually listened to me rant through this. But we need to report all our sightings to Gardner Wildlife Health. What they'll do is they'll arrange for a sample to be collected or to send to them. If you have got 70% ethanol, that'd be really useful. It's most people don't. So if you don't, strong vodka is a good secondary one. If you can complete the form at reptilarium.org/leech survey, that'd be really handy because that's what we're using to sort of, record all the sightings. If you can email Angie or myself, I'm particularly interested in the HIWARG Darn area or any of the adjacent ARG regions as well. Craig at Bug Life has said he's quite willing to help identify as well and give advice. So if you wanted to email him with photos, if any you find, he's very interested. And also Tarak at Ravon is very interested in any Northern European or maybe even sort of UK sightings as well. I don't know. But yeah, so thank you for listening. It's a bit of a fast wander through that. So it's there's a lot of information we don't have. It's just sort of showing where we've gone, where we've got to, and hopefully where we want to go to. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pete. That's fantastic. Really interesting. And yeah, you're right. It's early days, but already we're in touch with the experts and we're on this. Sam, questions?
Pete, you've got millions. Sorry, but I'll try to summarise them. You knew you were going to be popular. Right. So I'm trying to group them. Alexia and Dan have asked about the mortality rate of the amphibians who are infected and linked to that, or just the general conditions. Were they emaciated or were they okay?
We've had there's quite a range actually. It's most of them seem to find most of the frogs and toads that were tested as a non-native species, they seemed fine. Just trying to think of the one of the frogs did die, unfortunately didn't make it. The frogs seem to fare worse. We've had more cases of frogs not surviving. And yeah, so at this point in time, we do need more samples. So I can't give you anything more than that. Frogs seem to suffer more. But yeah, we do need more sightings. We've only really had 5 that have been sampled.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Linked to that then, Miranda has asked, how do we remove leeches from the toads and frogs, especially from their eye area?
Right, that's something what I probably have to come back with and give. We have got some suggestions, but obviously if we're going to put it out to people, what we have found helps to remove them is if they're actually immersed in water, they do sometimes, because most of these are actually being found terrestrially, actually not in water or very close to the edge of ponds. And when they've been put into water, some of the leeches actually release. But we will come back with a guide on how to do that. But the Garden Wildlife Health, if you report it on their website, they will actually come back to you with advice themselves anyway. But it might be useful. I have reached out to the Institute of Zoology to talk about getting a guide ready for tow patrollers. So they're in discussion with Frog Life on how to take that forward. So it might be that we could sort of put something forward into that.
Okay, great. Somebody's asked about what to do with the vodka, so I guess that's related to that. So I guess if people do want to actually be sending in samples, is it to contact yourselves or Garden Wildlife Health? Who would you recommend that people contact if they've suddenly found leeches?
Yeah, so what was that again?
Should they contact Garden Wildlife Health?
Oh, 100%, yeah. All sightings, as on that, what I could do is I could probably share that last slide because it's got all the links if I do that on a post on the forum. Yeah, so contact Garden Wildlife Health. If they can record it on the leech survey as well. They're the two main ones. But yeah, so there's for help with leech IDs, Craig at Bug Life will help. So that last slide had all the contacts on. Shall I put that back up if people want to write those down?
Yeah, maybe if you pop that up, and I'll just finish off a quick couple of last questions. I know we've got a couple of minutes. Again, is this referring to all leeches that people see, Pete, or are you particularly interested in these ones which are feeding this particular way? Alice has said that she's seen lone leeches feeding. Do you want all information on all leeches?
I think if we keep it at this point to this particular way, because there are quite a number of leeches that feed. I think we'll probably there's 5 or 6 without the whole sort of the horse leech will feed on dead amphibians, particularly. Obviously, the medicinal leech will feed on amphibians, but even without those, there's about sort of 4 or 5 other species that will feed in particular manners. But it's just this feeding on the eyes, on the throat, and then the axilla under the armpits. That's the particular ones we're looking at because it ties it down, it narrows it down to maybe 3 species. So it's yeah, so that would be best if possible.
Okay, yeah, David mentioned that there is evidence of leeches feeding on smooth but not palmate newts as well. So there's obviously they do feed, but it's this particular feeding pattern I think you're interested in, isn't that, at the moment? I'll leave a few questions in the Q&A, Pete, if you don't mind having a quick look after the talk as well.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'll close that slide now, and but I can actually share that because that's got all the contact details anyway. Thank you.
Right. Okay, thanks, Sam. Last but absolutely not least, we're going to hear from the Dragons in the Hills team. This is an ARG UK led project, but it's very much a partnership with the Herpetological Society of Ireland and Newry, Mourne and Down District Council. So we have 2 representatives here, one from ARG UK and one from HSI, who need no introduction, I would think. Anyway, over to you chaps, start sharing and tell us about Dragons in the Hills.
This is the Dragons in the Hills project. It's a lottery heritage funded project. It's running for 3 years in total. We're now into our 3rd year, starting this January. And I took over from the project there in May last year. So halfway through the project, I was fired in. And so far, it's been a lot of fun. So year 1, just to give you an idea of the geography, the kind of aim of this talk is to give you a little bit of a more better understanding of Northern Ireland in general and the kind of things that we're trying to do and trying to start, because we're very much behind in terms of surveying and volunteers as the mainland of United Kingdom would be. So year 1 was down in, you can see the red circle there in the Ring of Gullion. That's where Josh Twining, my predecessor, did a lot of work with a lot of other groups like Antibar Wellness and Social Farming Centre, which I'll get on to later. Year 2 has been in the Mourne Mountains, which is when I took over halfway through last year. And now year 3 is that really big focus on Strangford region and Lecale. So it's worth mentioning as well, sort of going back to Emma Gardner's talk as well, I've actually circled some habitats with the yellow there where we expect to see some lizards. Strangford Loch is very much an arable area, so there aren't very many patches of good habitat that we might be finding our common lizard. And I'm sure you're all aware the common lizards are only reptile, along with our smooth newt and common froggers are only amphibians. So it makes presentations pretty straightforward for me. So this is Strangford Loch. It is an area of outstanding natural beauty and an area of special scientific interest. It's really characterized by these rolling hills called drumlins, which were left over during the Ice Age period as the sheet started to retreat. I just want to cast your eye over to Strangford Loch's topography in general. It has 120 islands as a result of these drumlins altogether. About 20% of them are owned by the National Trust. And none of them, as far as I'm concerned, have ever really been surveyed for reptiles or amphibians. In fact, there's a whole blank spot the whole way across the peninsula. And I've recently been able to find some anecdotal evidence, chatting to some locals, and also using that model that Emma has provided has been really useful in trying to work out a way to survey the land. I guess our project kind of goes through a couple of avenues. One is to directly interact with communities via school visits or public events. And then the other one is trying to create a volunteer base, or at the very least, try and drum up a little bit of interest in smaller areas. So we're targeting landowners like the National Trust, but I'll get onto that in just a moment. But it's worth mentioning that Strangford Loch is a really, really unique area. It's about 150 miles of coastline around it, and I think it covers around 58 square miles, 50 square kilometers will actually be like an intertidal zone. I think we have somewhere between 10, maybe even 20 varying intertidal habitats, especially in that top left. You'll see there's like a freshwater estuary in Cumber River there. So it's a really special place, particularly for overwintering birds like Brent geese, barnacle geese, and all the rest of it. So it's a really special place. So where it all began was in the Mourne Mountains, where year 2 took over. In the photo on the left, you'll see the dry stone granite walls. So the moorns are characterized by their granite rock. That wall will actually run for 20 miles over 15 peaks. That was built in the 1920s by hand, and everything inside that wall is owned by Northern Ireland Water. And if you look in the top right, you'll see a body of water called Silent Valley. There are 3 big reservoirs that are basically our water source for the Belfast and Strangford area in general. You can see Rob there. You can see the nice back of his head there, and Ryan from Northern Ireland ARG as well. This is where I first met these guys back in May to do a survey of what we call wee binion and sleeve binion there in the mountains. And that's generally what the moorns are. There's beautiful heather and lowland bog and upland bog. So it really is quite a stunning, pristine piece of habitat. I'd also draw your attention to the fact that on the left picture there, you'll see a lot of heather. There's about 1,000 farmers operate in and around the Mourne area, and you can kind of see the grazing of sheep and where the wall has really discarded that. So it's quite an interesting dynamic habitat. So just going to go through some of the things that we've been doing over the last year chronologically. So back before I took part in the project, there was an art competition run in the Ring of Gullion schools art competitions with 90 students put some art in, and we were able to hold an event in this sort of outdoor space throughout these sort of COVID restrictions. And we had a really good recipients. We had I think 20% of those who submitted art actually came to show up and share in the prize giving events. So it was a really good day. I was able to sort of utilize this area. This was done at Antibar, which is a social wellness farming center. And Josh did a lot of work with their volunteers of adults with learning difficulties who come and volunteer their time. And they put up 70 signs, planted loads of trees, built a pond. And then I was able to come for this art competition and create a little scavenger hunt and hide some plastic lizards and make use of all the signs that have been put up. So it was a really, really good day out all in all. It's also worth mentioning the work that Josh had done with Antibar allowed us to obtain a John Moore Award, which was fantastic. So it required 125 plus hours of volunteer work over 6 months. And you sort of had to hit their 4 challenges, as it were, and prove it through discovering, exploring, conserving, and sharing. So all around. It was just a really great thing to be a part of. And that was down in the Ring of Gullion area. So the next part for us was where Rob came up and helped me in Silent Valley in our reptile rambles. We set up this lovely little pop-up tent. There were obviously on that bank holiday Monday there on August 2nd, there were obviously a few fathers who were being dragged out, not quite knowing what the stand was about, telling their young children to get away from there. But I'll let Rob tell a little bit more about the Silent Valley reptile rambles.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so as Ryan said, my role primarily is as a supportive position to Ryan, who's doing an absolutely incredible job in the north. But what we decided to do, I think, last August was, again, taking our ideas from what you guys in Great Britain do, is we decided to host family days. For people that don't know, this part of Northern Ireland is quite rural. The communities are quite small and close-knit, and it can be very difficult to get people to engage. So what we decided to do was we'd have the family days, we'd offer them a free bit of grub, particularly cake, to get them all to come along. And then because Silent Valley and the guys at Northern Irish Water were so nice to us, they essentially gave us free reign of the whole site for the day. And they have a couple of looped trails, one of which is particularly excellent for lizards. It's also very, very close to where we were able to set up the stand. There was a red squirrel dray right in the middle of the car park beside us. So we were actually able to grab people as they were coming in, unassuming like, and kind of hit them with all this wildlife information, and then take them on a little walkway around to see some lizards. And, you know, it was really effective. Word seemed to have spread because we did the Saturday and the Sunday. So the second day was even busier than the first. The weather came out, the sun came out, and it was incredible. So we got 40 something odd lizard encounters on the first day. And again, there was people coming up whose family members had just been there to walk the dog, and then they all came back looking for free stickers. You know, and it was really, really effective. Loads of people signed up then onto Ryan's volunteer sheet, people who were going to go out and, you know, just collect records of lizards. So exactly what we were hoping would happen with this type of, you know, this type of outreach event that was going to actually support the Dragons Project in general. And I think this is probably the way we're going to do it going forward, is that Ryan's going to get everybody and all the school kids really excited, which is already done. They're rearing tadpoles in the schools now. And then when they hear that there's an event going down, we're going to arrive up with our vouchers for tea and cake, and we're going to kind of hit them with the good stuff. So it really is a fantastic project. Like, given Ryan is the only full-time employee, like, and it's such a massive geographic area, and it is quite rural, and he's done an incredible job. We're up there again now tomorrow with the National Trust Rangers, who have been nothing but really supportive and really helpful, like whether it was up in Mount Stewart, or tomorrow when we're heading to Murlock, which is another great site for lizards. As myself and Angie know from our proof of concept study back in 2018-19. So yeah, I think all credits to Ryan and all credit to the project. We're starting to really get to the nitty gritty of the project and really start to make the inroads that we hope for. So I think there's really good scope here to expand into the future, and I hope that's where it's going to go, because like the local people have they've embraced us now, that they know we're all a bit nuts, but that's fantastic. And I think we really have them enthused for like getting out and finding lizards and finding newts and finding frogs now. So yeah, that's really it. And I'll pass you back to Ryan, because he's done such a great job. I think he needs to take the lion's share of the credit for all of this. So thanks for listening to me for a couple of minutes.
Very good. Thanks, Rob. But it's an honourable mention to Angie Spot the Lizard there on the bottom. And I think Susie Collins was also very helpful in trying to help me give me ideas for Pin the Tail on the Lizard, which went down a treat. So it was good fun. I really enjoyed those days out. One of the sort of landowners that we got to engage with was the Mourne Heritage Trust. And their role really is to look after the Mourne Mountains, look after the trails, and look after the habitats. These guys were straight away really enthusiastic. So Rob and I were able to take them on a training day for all three herpetile species. And then we went for a walk through Silent Valley, sort of pointing out the right sorts of habitats. This was also a bit of a taster session for us to then work out what do they want to know, like what would be useful information for them. And as a result, now we've been able to create other events, dedicated amphibian survey training and dedicated reptile and management training. So these guys are really enthusiastic, and as you can see, it's been absolutely great. I sort of, again, like I said about surveying done in Northern Ireland, like it's very hard, especially because I think ARG Web isn't quite up for us as well, which is obviously a really useful tool for landowners like Mourne Heritage Trust and National Trust. But I've kind of threw up a few transects for these guys to look at, 13 in total in the Mourne area. And I'm now working on creating the same for the Strangford area. Again, credit to Emma's models for helping me with that, particularly in the Strangford area. But at this point, it's just about encouraging people to get out there. It's kind of the inroads. So Silent Valley, just to reiterate, it is a giant reservoir that sort of is a water supply for all of Belfast. The top right, you'll see those paths that Rob mentioned, and the green boardwalk there in the bottom left is the one that we really try. And we can just use, we're trying to encourage even the Mourne Heritage Trust guys on their mornings just to even walk those whenever they can. So at this point, we're really just trying to get things going. Recently, we were with the Strangford and Mount Stewart National Trust team. Mount Stewart is a sort of farm area. It's got like a 15-mile perimeter around it, and they're doing a lot of incredible agricultural work, particularly minded in terms of conservation, and it's been really quite exciting and restoring a lot of wetlands back to their states before it was a stately home. Mount Divis is actually the hills above Belfast, which are like heather and upland bog as well, which is also a great place to find lizards. So these guys all came down from those 3 different branches and were able to meet us here in Mount Stewart. We were able to do some amphibian survey training, and it was a great day out. We did some pond dipping, and they shared it on their Twitter, and they were like thrilled. So we're very happy with working with the National Trust. For us, it's huge. I think the focus is getting onto these guys before we develop any volunteers. Another little thing that I've been working on with Ryan Boyle, who's sort of the chair for NIARG, is do a little bit of habitat management proposal work in Scrabo Tower. So Scrabo Tower is right up in the northern part of Strangford Loch in Newton Ards, and it is a small little pocket of heathland and scrubland, as you can see in the photos there. And we've proposed different areas of like cutting in scallops and scars and some gradient cutting for the habitat. The idea is to sort of get the NIEA, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, who manage this land, to kind of appreciate that there are lizards here, and see if they'd be interested in doing some minimal habitat management moving forward as possible. So that's kind of the encouragement we're trying to get there. I'd also quite like to put some kind of sign in there just to say the common lizards are here. So we've got a full preliminary survey sort of planned out, a proposal sent off. So fingers crossed we get the go ahead for this year. So tomorrow, Rob and I will be visiting this beautiful spot called Murloch, which is a stunning piece of heather and a samosair. So it's a sand dune system that is just across the bay from the Mourne Mountains. So the National Trust has been split up through people who work on the Mournes into Murloch and further around Strangford. So we're trying to target these teams specifically and cater to their needs. So tomorrow in particular will be the reptile survey and management training, because that's what they're very much interested in. And also the Mourne Mountains experienced a lot of wildfires there last summer, not summer, but the summer before. So they're very interested in trying to work out how to do the wildfire recovery and sort of how they can think about helping that for the lizards as much as possible. So we've got the amphibian training for these guys as well in March coming up. So as moving forward for the school visits, so we have 8 schools in total across the Mourne, Lakeal and Strangford area. 6 are primary level. Each of those primary schools are receiving 3 talks and 1 organised field trip to try and get them to at least see a lizard for themselves, because some of them live very close to some of these areas, or at least do some pond dipping. The secondary schools are more like focused on kind of create potential volunteers. I know we've got some A-level students who'd be great, especially the ones that are maybe going to want to do biological sciences or zoology. And there are also schools that I attended a while ago. So they actually want me to discuss things on careers and sort of maybe get people excited in the conservation field in general. So all in all, it's been really great so far. But just to give you a little idea of the kind of things we've been talking about, the first talk, I did just on snakes, very simple PowerPoint and all of the world's snakes. And the reason I've got the University of Central Lancashire up there is because they're doing an external assessment on the project. So I used this first talk to try and get all those permission slips back in. But they took it upon themselves to 2 schools in particular have like a shared education network within the same town. One is an Irish medium school. And they took it upon themselves to do like a poster based off of my presentation, which was absolutely fantastic. And you can put it in the Q&A. If you can guess what that snake is that someone has drawn, it is the head of a snake, and the pattern should be quite striking. So we'll see if anyone gets that. But talk 2 is on classification and biodiversity in general. We went through the mammal invertebrates and vertebrate groups. And then I sort of encouraged a bit more love for those invertebrate groups that don't quite get it, same as our herpetiles in general. The third talk was then on our native reptile and amphibians. And actually today I was able to sort of have some kids and I brought them in tadpoles and for them to take care of, and they're all rather excited and had lots of questions. So it's overall just a generally quite exciting thing to be a part of. And then here are the posters from the invertebrate talk as well that they took upon themselves again from 2 or 3 other schools. So they've really taken up well. It's been really good. So just a thanks to all of our volunteers from the National Trust, Moran Heritage Trust, to all the boots on the ground, for all of which I could count on 2 hands at most. But even with all that, we've accumulated over 390 hours of work since I've took over in May. So we've done really quite well, all things considered. And just to give you an idea of the kind of sightings we recorded in 2021, the green represents our lizards, the blue represents our smooth newts. As you can clearly see, Strangford on that eastern edge is a complete blank spot for lizards. But with our inroads into the National Trust, I will have access to the drumlins. They've already invited me to come out on the boats with them and start working on the islands with them. And it's also worth mentioning that, again, Emma's work with the modelling, with our conversation with the National Trust, there's a biodiversity recovery network, which is the National Trust, RSPB, Forest Trust, and Ulster Wildlife Trust, are all banding together to try and create better networks or habitat corridors and how they can prioritize areas. And they've sort of implied and said that if they would require anything more in depth about the reptiles and amphibians, we'll be there. And I've also asked Em's permission to share the modeling with them. So we're already getting some really good inroads and hopefully doing some good in the long run. So basically what's next? At this stage, we've got to finish engagement with the schools, including the field trips, more summer events like the reptile rambles at Silent Valley. I suspect we'll try and create more community groups on Strangford itself. That'll be closer to summer. Pond dipping included in National Trust sites like Castle Ward and Mount Stewart. Establishing more volunteers, pretty much as many as we can, but real big focus on those landowners like the National Trust. That just seems to be how we're going, and it seems to be going well. So thank you all very much for listening. It's been a blast so far. I've really enjoyed myself. So it should be criminal to have this much fun while working, but I'll take it. But if any questions, fire away. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Ryan and Rob. Over to Sam, our question mistress.
Well, we haven't had any specific questions, just as you'd expect, tons and tons of praise. So I'm trying to look through now. Just say everybody's saying just how amazing the area you're working in and the work you're doing is just fantastic. And tea, cake and lizards, what's not to like? I was particularly interested in the fact you're working with them on the wildfire side as well. So
yeah.
So I'm just wondering, yeah, because I've done some work with that in Pembrokeshire with cutting fire breaks and just being sensitive, you know, and doing surveys before they cut fire breaks. But the fire breaks themselves, once they cut, can be really, really productive for surveying. So I'm just guessing that that's kind of something you've got in the pipeline as well.
Yeah, so I actually haven't been up there to see the burn site, and I'm really keen to get up there and have a look because it burnt over a year ago. And from my understanding is the fire didn't penetrate too deep into the soil level, so the heather really has a good chance of coming back quite nicely. Mm-hmm. As for surveying and population, again, these guys really have very little time to do surveying, and I don't think they really have the know-how, and that's why I think our presentations training is so key at the minute. But I think they're really keen to try and start doing that. So I guess that is the next step, is to establish some transects for them on the burn sites and get some meaningful data moving forward, because there will almost certainly be more fires, I'm afraid, in the Mourns, unfortunately. So moving forward, it seems to be quite a nice sort of springboard.
Mm-hmm. And certainly if you can try and find some main hibernation areas as well, and you know, that'll be a great thing to start with the protection for the fire areas as well. So
yeah, precisely. I mean, it's worth noting that the Mourns are actually a huge blanket. So in terms of habitat, it's not isolated basically. So it'd be interesting to find any kind of hibernaculum in any one area. So
great.
Yeah, Sam, sorry, just to jump in there. So obviously, again, we look at what you guys are up to as well, and because Pembrokeshire would be very similar in habitat to most of the east coast of Ireland, you know, and it'd be similar. We're going to be looking at, you know, things like simple stuff, create artificial refuge after a big burn. Any cover is better than no cover, and then try and connect it all up so that the lizards can recolonize the site, you know, pretty quickly, so that they don't kind of move out and stay out. We've seen even from some of the burn sites just outside Dublin City that like they're quite resilient to burning once they have somewhere to go to, but they will kind of leave the area until the header and the gorse starts to grow back in. So we think getting cover of any sort is probably going to be the you know, the first part of the advice. Any cover will do. Like we've seen them basking on the chair, like it's still smoking, and they'll sit on any bit of rush or any bit of heat that didn't burn. So they're tolerant of it. I think just where the Donard burned last year was such a massive area. I think it was starting 5 different places, Ryan. The police told us.
So they say 4 or 5 different
huge.
places.
Yeah, huge. So I think the cover and the fire breaks is going to be, I think, really super important in management. And then again, as you say, edge habitats, good for surveying, setting out routes too. So yeah, really good advice coming from you guys too, which is wonderful for us. So
and trying to keep the load down as well, because I think if it gets too high, you know, you're going to get hotter burns in the summer when you don't want it to happen. So it's all about getting that. There's certainly wildfire groups in South Wales that could be able to feed into what you're doing as well.
Yeah, and I think it's getting appropriate training even for the fire service. I know our crowd down here was sent to Spain to work with some of the Spanish guys to learn how to do it properly. And now they're doing like fire break grazing. They've introduced old Irish goats, which are a native breed. So there's, again, it's multiple facets of you know, nature conservation. So they're using the goats to graze down a lot of the dense bracken and the dense gorse and heather. So again, yeah, like you said, minimize the fuel load too. So they're probably at a good point now, because the burn was so large last year that they're almost starting from a blank slate, you know, and there's the chances to keep kind of track of it and keep it under control now. So moving forward, so yeah, I'd be very interested to see how it pans out.
Great. Over to you, Angie.
Okay, right. Well, I think we've hit the magic pumpkin time of 9 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for your time. So thank you to everyone that presented, everybody that came and sat with us. And just to say, hopefully that's a little bit of an overview of ARG UK. We have 38 active ARGs. Every one of them is doing fantastic conservation work. So necessarily this is only ever going to be a snapshot. But just going to say you're all absolutely brilliant. And let's look forward to hopefully a good and slightly less COVID-y year when we can actually all get out and carry on doing good stuff. So thank you to everybody. And I won't say we'll see you all next year, but we'll be in touch. Thank you all. I shall let you go. Good night.